All right. Hello. Let me know if y'all can hear me. And we'll get started. Okay. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Let me know if you guys can hear me. And yeah. Okay. So sorry for not being here on Wednesday. I was out of town. But yeah. Anyways, now let's resume where we left off. And what I wanted to go over was the idea of something that's called middleware. And we kind of touched on this, which was the right here. So this is an example of some middleware. So we have this keyword, not a keyword, but the special method on this object here called use. So that's very, very interesting, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call this server.js. Okay. And in here, I'm going to build an Express application just like before, but I want to just talk about middleware, and then we'll relate it back to what we're building over here. Okay, I don't want to have like too much code. All right, so we're going to just start off by saying const express equals require express. Okay, we have our app, and we build that by just calling express as a function. Okay, we then say app.listen, and in here I'm just going to hard code the port to say 3000 like that, and then we have our callback for when the application actually starts to listen. So we say console.log using the string literals, the backticks, listening on ports. I hard coded it. I'm just going to put 3000 like that. Okay. And so this is a super basic Express app. It does nothing, but it works. So if we were to run this using node and then passing in server.js, it'll say listening on port 3000. And if we open up Postman, here we run a very simple GET request and hit send, we get the cannot get slash. Perfect. So our Express application is running. Okay. Cool. So we have the default error handler here, right? We get this default error, and it's in the content type is under HTML, and it throws a 404 because, well, we didn't put a GET request, right? So every time I've been talking about registering a handler or registering a path, what I've been talking about is something called, an action handler. Okay. So action handlers take the form of app dot, and then you have get for a get request, post request, delete request. You also have the put requests. Okay, and I think I said post request as well. Post. Okay, those are called action handlers. So here I'm going to register an action handler called the get request. on the URL slash, okay? And then the request handler is just the request and then the response object. So this is something that we've been doing, that we did on Monday. And this is a basic request handler for the get on URL slash, okay? And that's it. That's what this function is. Remember, this is a callback. We call this a callback. Now, one thing that you can do, just to make it abundantly clear, is we could have easily have just done something like this. Function, we can say on get home, okay, and pass in a request and a response, okay, and we could have easily have just done this, on get home, right, or something like that. Okay, so on get home, we can then say response dot send. We could say something like hello. Okay, so I'm going to kill the server, run it again. I go back over here, Postman, I just hit send. I get just a plain old hello. Okay, so you can separate out the action, the request handlers on the action handlers that we're subscribing to here. You can totally set them apart. Okay, you can even go a step further and use ES6. So we can say const on get home is equal to, and then convert this to an arrow function. Okay, this would have the same effect. So I'm going to kill the server, run it again, go to Postman, run this again, I get hello again. Okay, so no difference. So so there is effectively 3 different ways we can do this. One, we pass in a handler directly, okay, as a arrow function. Number 2, we create a function and then pass it as a parameter, as an argument to this get method. Number 2, we assign the arrow function to a const variable like this, and then we pass this as an argument to the get method, okay, or any kind of action handler. So you have get request, post request, put request, delete request, update request. Those are all action. Those are all actions, and so we're trying to pass in a handler. Who's going to handle that particular action? Okay. Now, effectively, what this is, okay, behind the scenes that you don't really know a whole lot because you didn't build Express, but the way Express works is everything that we've been writing, all of these action handlers right here, all this effectively is middleware. That's basically what it is. So what the heck is middleware? Well, let's do a drawing. So here we have, this little box. So this box, think of it as our package, okay, our packet. So this is our request. So we'll call this our request. Okay, our request comes into our server. So this is our server. Okay. Okay, that's our little server right here. Okay, some little LEDs or whatever. This is our server. So we have we do let's say a get request to home, right? This is our request. It comes into our server. Our server is listening on, whatever port it was. Like, let's say it was port 3000, okay? And then we have an application, our actual app. This is our Express application / Express. Okay. And then in the GET request, this right here, this is essentially the path name, the URL. Where are you trying to go? You obviously landed here, so we actually don't care about the domain because we are at that domain. So, example.com, nobody cares, right? That's what got you here. So we know who you were trying to target, right? You're here. Does that make sense? Like, if you show up at your friend's house, now you know his address or her address, right? You show up at your friend's house, then you're there. Are they going to ask you what address you used? That seems kind of weird, right? Like, you don't care because all you know is, well, they're here. If you didn't know the address, how the heck would you be able to get here? So that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so we don't care about that part. What we care about is, okay, you got to the location, the house, say, okay, but who were you looking for, right? The person basically inside the house is like the resource. Who were you looking for? Were you looking for Jim? Were you looking for Bob? For Jane? Who are you looking for, right? And so that's what this slash blah, blah, blah is going to be. That's like, okay, we know where we're at. We know the address. Okay, so that's a given. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, what is it that you're trying to locate? What are you trying to locate? And Express, that's basically all it's trying to do. It's trying to help you write your code so you know what, people that are trying to use your API, you know what they're trying to locate. Okay, and that's what these action handlers are for. Because in the HTTP world, the actions that you're going to be using the most are GET requests, POST requests, PUT request, delete, okay? These are the actions right here. These are the actions, okay? These are your actions. Okay, these are the actions. Express is going to segregate the different actions, okay? So if you have a GET request and it's a /, you're trying to get, and remember, this is called home. That's completely different than post home and put home and delete home. These are all segregated. They're completely separate. They do different things. Even though you're targeting technically the same resource, which is home, because the action is different, that's a completely different handler that must handle that request if one exists. So let's say we tried to do a post request on a /, which is home, but there was no subscription there. There was no handler to basically handle that request. Well, that's when Express throws that weird error. So if I do just a /, just to make my point here, I do a send, everything works fine. Why? Because there's a handler for that particular action, right? onGetHome is my handler. In fact, let me go even a step further here and call it onGetHome handler. That's what a lot of people tend to call it. They'll postfix a handler so you know, oh, this is supposed to handle something. And this, in our context, it's handling these requests, these action handlers. Okay, so there's my /, I hit send. Okay, cool. So I have a handler registered for the particular action get on the / resource. That's completely different. And if I change this action here to a post request, I'm still trying to target this /. If I hit send, Express didn't find any handler to handle that particular action on that particular URL or resource, which is home /. So we get this default error handler from Express. Is this making sense? Does this make sense how this is working? How these are completely different? So Express is completely separating these things out, right? So a get on / is different from a post on /. Okay. So when we start thinking things a little bit more complicated, like we want to get /users versus posting on /users, those are completely different actions. Even though we're targeting technically the same URL, they're completely different actions because one's a get, one's a post. So if there is no handler on that particular action, then Express is always going to throw this error here, right? Cannot, this action on that particular URL. For example, users. There is none of that. So you cannot get on users. You cannot post on users, right? There is no action handler that's handling that particular scenario. We can see it plain as daylight right here. That's why we're getting that error. Okay. So Express is going to separate out these actions. Okay, we're going to completely segregate them. So get, post, put, delete, these kinds of things, they're completely separate, even if they are targeting the same path name. We sometimes call this, okay, these are sometimes called a path name. Okay. Basically, where you're trying to go, right? What's the path? Slash users, that's a path. Slash admins, that's a path. Slash media, slash photos, slash video, that's a path. Okay, these are all paths. Okay. So now that we understand how Express is going to separate out the different actions, even if they are pointing to the exact same, path name, they're completely different. Okay. So what the heck does any of this have to do with our topics today? Well, to understand middleware, you have to understand how Express is basically separating these things out. What Express is basically doing behind the scenes is when a request comes in, a typical HTTP request has a host name, right? It has a host name property, which is going to have, the HTTP : / in our case, it's going to be localhost and then 3000 / and then, let's say it's just slash. Okay, there's our host name. Sorry for the terrible handwriting. Remember, I'm just using my mouse. I don't have a fancy pen. Okay, so we have host HTTP : right here, / / right? This is the protocol. Remember, this is the protocol. This is the actual domain. And then this is the port. And then this little guy right here, if it's missing, it's implied. So if you don't explicitly see it, it's implied. This is the beginning of a path name. So this is a valid path name. When you see something like this, that's just home. That's home. And home is a relative thing. And we'll talk more about that when we get more into routes. Okay. So what the heck does Express do? Well, Express is basically going to trim this off, and all it's going to do is care about whatever happens after. So we have /users, whatever. Express sees this as a path name. It's like, oh, you want /users, and you're doing a GET request? Let me see if somebody registered app.get on /users. It's going to look for it, basically. Okay, it's going to look for it. If there is no handler, so if there's no handler for this particular action with this particular path name, if no handler is found, then it errors out. Okay, then it errors out. And we've already seen an error like that. It errors out. Boom. And that's all it's doing, right? That's all it's doing. Remember, I showed you how to build something like this with the HTTP server. It was super basic. And it's like a series of switch statements. Again, you could have probably been smarter on how to actually build that. Now, Express is basically just doing that. That's all it's doing for you. But it's a beautiful thing, okay? Because it's an oversimplification, but that's basically the gist, okay? So, what's cool about this framework, the way it's built? What's super awesome about it? Well, Express has a pattern that supports middleware, because what Express can do is, once we have this request, the HTTP packet comes in, has the body, has the headers, and all that kind of junk. Express is going to create a request object. It's going to create a response object, so you can actually do the response to those requests. Okay? And that's it. And it's going to create this little package right here for you. It's like, cool. But then the people that made Express were smart. They're like, well, what if we needed to do some pre-processing? How can we do that? Well, what you can do is the following. Once we have the request and we have this response object, okay? Now, what's the difference between a request and a response? Well, the request is basically just going to have the information, all the headers and the data that was sent to the server. That's the request. The response is going to have all the information about who the person did the request. So we know how to respond, right? So if you call me to my server, the response basically has caller ID, right? It's like, oh, you called me on this IP address with this port. Well, I know how to respond to you. That's the whole TCP connection that happens. Remember the TCP connection? Okay. The response is basically contains this connection. So we know how to, if this is our server over here, this is our client, this response object is basically the pipe, the data pipe, okay? And how we're going to communicate data. So we have some data here, and we're going to send it back based off of the client's request, okay? The request went here, the data is going to flow out, okay, from this pipe. That's how it works, okay? That's what this response object has. So it's very, very, very important, right? It's very important. But again, what if we wanted to do some pre-processing? We wanted to maybe change the request up a bit, like, oh, okay, well, if the content type is like this, let's load up some parsers to help parse out XML, for example. I don't know. Something like that. Well, Express will feed this package, this little request and response, and it's going to feed it down into some middleware. Okay. This middleware will take this request and response, okay, and it will create, okay, you still have the request and the response, okay. However, the request and the response now have like these asterisks, because it's possible that the middleware has modified these two objects in some capacity. For example, if we use a Json middleware, right, then one of two things can happen, okay? If we're using the middleware, like in this example over here, this middleware here, this Express.json middleware, what that's going to do is it's going to look at the request.body property, okay? And it's going to get all the data out as raw bytes. It's just a buffer. And I showed you how we can listen in on that using the request.on, and then the action or the event emitted is the data, and you have to pass in a handler, blah, 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 blah. So what that middleware is going to do is basically that. It's going to wait until we get all the data. Then it's going to update the body to have the parsed version as JSON in this body property if it's possible. For example, this middleware is assuming, right here, this middleware here is assuming that you're going to feed it in the body valid JSON. But again, you should never trust it, right? So what this middleware does is going to check to see, okay, do I have a valid, JSON data, right? And one of the first ways to figure that out is, well, let's just check the content type. Is the content type JSON? Oh, it's not? Then we're not going to try and handle that. Okay, if the content type is JSON, then it's going to try and handle it. Okay. What it then does, if it's able to handle it, it's going to update the request.body. So here, when we try to consume the request.body as JSON, which here's the middleware, and then here, when we try to consume it here, it's already been parsed for us. We didn't have to do anything. It did it for us, right? All the code is isolated there. So by the time we say request.body, again, it's possible that the body is valid JSON. It depends on whether or not the client sent us valid JSON. If they did, then we totally have it in here. If they didn't, then this is going to be undefined because it wasn't valid JSON, so it's undefined. But what's cool is that we can isolate that type of code, right, that's going to be repeated over and over and over again. We can isolate it, okay, into this little package here, and we can use it what's called global. So when we say use, this is at the global level, okay? That's at the global level. You could also pass middleware, for example, in here. So I can say Express.json. I can pass it in here, okay, right in the middle. This kind of looks like in the middle. So what's going to happen here is when app.post/user gets called, it's going to pass the request and the response to this middleware. Once this middleware is done processing the request and response, however the middleware is going to act on it, it will then pass along the modified request and response so that we can use it with the modifications we have specified here. For example, let's say you want to authenticate somebody before they are able to look at a profile. Okay, we wanted to check to see that they have valid permissions or something like that. Well, we can use a middleware to do that. So our code here doesn't, if there's various locations where we need to authenticate a user, you're not repeating yourself over and over and over again. You can use middleware, okay? So enough of me talking, and let's write some middleware. So I'm going to kill this, and let's write some middleware. So again, with these action handlers, using them as a function or using them like an arrow function like this, either one is totally valid. It's using them as separate functions is good if you're going to use it for like testing purposes. I think that's a great reason to separate these out. Okay, but for now, let's keep things a little more basic here, and we're just going to use the arrow functions like this, where we're going to feed it indirectly like so. Okay. So let's write some basic middleware. So we're going to write some middleware at the global level. So how do we do that? We say app.use. Okay, so this is effectively adding middleware at the global level. Okay, so how does this look like? Well, it takes a handler, which is going to be the request, the response, and then we're introducing a new thing here, and that's called next. Okay. Okay. So here you had request and response, but when we have middleware, we have at least three now: request, response, and this new object called next. Okay, well, let's see how this works. I'm going to say console.log I am middleware. Okay, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do. That's my middleware. Okay, I'm going to run my server. Okay, I'm going to try and hit /users. Hit send. And it says, look at that. It says I am middleware. But now my request is hanging. It's hung. It's stuck. Why is that? Can anybody tell me why it's hanging? Nobody has the... You didn't end. Beautiful. Jim's got it. Okay, remember the way we're writing our server, it's under the request response architecture. The client here, in this example, the client is Postman, made a request. We received the request, clearly, but we never responded. So it's waiting, right? The client will wait until we get a response. So I'm going to hit cancel here. Okay, cool. So we hit this middleware. Now you'll notice that I didn't have to register it to a particular, path. That's interesting, right? That's very interesting. Okay. So I didn't have to register for anything because what the middleware does is it's going to be some code that's basically going to get executed before any of these other action handlers will get executed, if it is that they exist, that they have been registered to. Okay, so the next question is, well, once we've written our middleware and we have our code here, how do we tell it to process the request now, right? Well, that's where next comes in. So you just say next. So call next when your middleware is done doing its job. Okay, so I'm going to kill this now. Clear the screen, run it again. Let's open up Postman. Okay, I'm going to do /users, hit send. It says here, I am middleware, but hey, look at now, we're getting our error again. Beautiful, why? Well, we're hitting /users. Okay, do we have /users? Do we have an action handler for a get request on /users? No. So Express is going to error out. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then it just dies, right? We get this very basic, error message from Express. This is the default error message. So we get 404 not found, and it serves it as HTML. But the most important part is, look, I have middleware. I wrote some middleware. So I can do stuff now. For example, let's say you wanted to write some middleware so you can log every request that is done on your server. Okay? So for example, if I had this action handler, I could do it here. I could say, console.log request.original URL. So I can say something like, pretend like I was going to store this to a file. So log all of the URLs that are hit for analytics purposes, right? Because if you're not keeping track of how your server is being run, you're not doing your job, right? You actually want to know what URLs are actually getting hit. What endpoints of your backend are actually getting hit the most. This gives you an idea of what's popular, what's not. Also, if you're, somebody's trying to DDoS you or trying to attack, why is it that they're attacking a very specific route? I mean, it's possible, right? What if they found a vulnerability? This might give you some information about, oh shit, we're not parsing the token properly. There's a vulnerability now. That's why they're hitting this route, not this other route. Let's fix this, right? You can get some insight as to what's going on. So imagine if I had a gazillion of these action handlers for various resources, get request, put request. I would have to remember every time to log the URL, right, to some file. So I would have the same code everywhere. And you might say, well, Kevin, just wrap it in a function and then just call the function. And I agree, yeah, okay, that if it takes more than one line of code to write to the file, the URL or whatever, yeah, totally right? Put it into a function. But see, now the problem is, now you're calling that function at every single route. What happens if you forget to put the log in one route? Now you're missing information, right? You think everything's running smooth because it doesn't error out. It just logs stuff to some file for analytic purposes, right? For data mining or whatever the heck you want to do with it, okay? So you have to remember that every time you create a route, hey, by the way, make sure you have this code in your code. That's dumb. That's poor design. But with middleware, you don't have to do that, right? We don't have to do this. If I wanted to have it where I log the original URL, instead of calling this on every single action handler, I can cut that code away. This action handler has no idea that its original URL is going to be logged, but I can do that with my middleware because the middleware has the original request. All the requests and response objects will be filtered through the middleware first before it goes to the action handler. If it is the case that there even is an action handler that has been subscribed to. Okay, so let's run this code here. Okay, here we go. So we have /users, hit send. Look at that. We have /users, we're logging it. Beautiful. We have home. There it is, I am middleware. There's the home. Okay, /admins. Okay, boom, my middleware is picking it up, /admin. So it knows. So you can imagine that I save these to a file, right? You wouldn't probably log I am middleware, but you can get the idea here, right? Now, what else could you do with something like this? What else could you do with something like this if you're trying to do like performance evaluations with middleware? Like, what if I wanted to know how long does this action handler take to run? Right? How long is it taking? We need to, hey guys, we need to keep track of this stuff, man. Like, for some reason, this particular, route is very slow. Well, what can you do? Well, use middleware, right? Because look at this. So I'm going to log console.log start, right? Start. And then here, it's going to call next. But that doesn't, when we call next, it doesn't return. Where here do you see a return statement? There is no return. So what happens? Well, this is going to run. It's going to take some amount of time. So what can you do? You can, do the end. See, when it's starting. You call the next action handler. And then when it ends. So you can have middleware that can wrap itself around your call. So I'm going to run this again. I'm going to hit send. There you go. It has start and it has end. So we know when we started, right? So we know when we're about to start. We do the call to basically run the next action handler if one exists. And then we know when it's done. So if you know when something starts and you know when something ends, if you take the time, you can subtract them. And what do you have? You have the time that it took this action handler to run. And you can log that for performance reasons, right? Log that, to a file. Be like, it took this action handler, blah, blah, blah. And then when you have a big old report of thousands and thousands of calls and you have the, all how long it took, you can take the average and be like, on average, it's taking us, the home action handler to send out hello. It's taking on average, 10 milliseconds. Can we improve on that? You see what I mean? Like these are the tools I'm giving you so you can do stuff like that. So you know how long a particular, request, how long is it going to take to be handled? You can now do that using something like this, for example. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is middleware. Okay. Now, I said that you can transform the request and response messages if you wanted to. Okay. And we can. We absolutely can. So what can we do? Well, let's say you wanted to have a middleware that on the request object, you added something called, I don't know, is authenticated. Is authenticated. Okay, and let's say it's false for now. Okay, and let's say your action handler here for some reason needs to know if you're authenticated. But you don't want to put the logic for authentication in here because you're probably going to use that in a bunch of other action handlers, correct? So now all you have to do is be like, okay, if request dot is authenticated, response dot send, you are allowed in here, else response dot send, you are not allowed in here. Got it. Okay, so this is super basic. I'm just sending a string back, right? If you're authenticated, you'll say, yeah, you're allowed to be in here. And if you're not authenticated, we're just saying you're not allowed to be in here. Okay? So just think for a moment, what could you use this for, right? To subroute based off authentication. So basically, you serve only resources to people that are allowed to see them versus people that are not. For example, let's say you have a Facebook profile and then you want to go to the account settings so you can let's say change your email for whatever reason. Okay, well, you do the request, right? You click on the settings button, you do a request to the backend that also sends your token, and it's gonna be like, okay, so you want to see the settings, and it then checks your token. Are you the person that's allowed to see this information? If you are, I will respond with the HTML page to show you the account settings. If you're not, I'm going to send you an error message saying, forbidden or something like that. Like you don't have the proper permissions. Okay. So effectively, that's what this middleware is going to do. Now, right now, it's just going to set it to false. Well, let's run this and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm just going to this on the get, which is home, right? Home. Switch this to a get. Hit send. It says you are not allowed in here because right now it's hard coded to false. But what if I set this to true? Okay, and I kill this, run it again, and now I hit send. It says you are allowed in here. Let's say that was an authentication. Okay, so now we have a way to authenticate, right? Now let's get a little bit more, let's get a bit more clever here. So what if I had a query parameter in here? Okay, so we have slash and we have, let's say, profile. We want to see a profile, okay? And let's say we put a token is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have under profile, slash profile, okay, we're going to pass in the token as a query parameter 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, if I hit send right now, it's going to say, can I get, because slash profile is not a, nobody's registered it. Okay, no worries. Let's register it now. app.get, or yeah, app.get slash profile. And let's do our action handler. So we have a request, a response, boom. So Jim Bob says, did you define is authenticated somewhere? Mine doesn't recognize it. Yeah, just right here. I just injected it like this. So it's right here in the middleware. The middleware is creating it. And then over here, we're just using it. See, the reason why we can do this is because the middleware has already injected this property beforehand. If you don't have this, this will throw, maybe. Okay. So make sure you have the middleware here done correctly. So let me zoom this in case it's kind of small to see. So this is our middleware. That's basically the authentication, quote unquote. So right now it's just going to say, yeah, you're allowed, whatever. Okay. And then in here, we're going to say request.isAuthenticated because we know it's going to get injected here. Okay, worst case, if we don't define it, remember the way if statements work in JavaScript. Properties could be undefined. So if you say if request.isAuthenticated, if it's not defined, meaning, I do this and I never put is authenticated in here, a property, if a property doesn't exist, means it's undefined, it will always result as false, so it always fall back to the else statement. So Jim says, okay, I was missing the request. It's good now. Okay, cool. Okay. So now I have this profile. So I want to be able to see the profile. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, here's a token, right? Token 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, how can we use this to our advantage to authenticate? How can we do that? We have this token there. Well, with Express, okay, with Express, there's a really cool thing that Express does for us. So that query parameter is part of the request object. So we can say request.query, okay, and let's just log this for now. Let's just log that. So I'm going to kill this real quick, run it again, bring in my postman. Okay, I'm just going to hit send. Okay, I didn't, here's profile. I didn't end the request like Jim told us. If you don't end it, it stays hanging. That's true. But look what happened over here. Look at that, right? So on line 7, on the request, there's this property called query. Query is basically doing what URL parser was doing, which was parsing out the query parameters and creating a JavaScript object for us. And look at that. There's the token 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my JavaScript object as a tuple, token as the key, and then the value, 1, 2, 3, 4 as a string. Remember, query parameters, all the values that you put in here will always be a string by default. It's not going to parse the data types. It's going to treat it like a string all the time. So if you want the number to be treated like a number, then you have to parse it, okay? And it's possible that it could fail. Because if the token is supposed to be all numbers, but some, person just does that, you need to be aware that this is a possible scenario. So if you try to parse a number out of letters, it's going to, error out. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay, cool. So now we have a way to get the token. Beautiful. Okay, beautiful. So let's do request.query.token. Kill that. Okay, so if the token parameter exists, we should just see 1, 2, 3, 4. And we see 1, 2, 3, 4. Beautiful. I'm going to kill this. All right, if we change this to a bunch of other stuff like that, hit send, I get all of that. Beautiful. Okay, so it's working. Awesome. So now all we want to do is say, okay, if request.query.token, if this token exists and it's equal to the string 1, 2, 3, 4, then we're going to say query.is, is authenticated. We're going to set that to true. Else, on the request object, we're going to say is authenticated to false. Okay, and then make sure to call next, else the request will hang. Okay, beautiful. Now at profile, we're just going to say if request dot is authenticated. Okay, so that's true. Then we're going to respond with send, you can view the profile. Else, respond.send, you cannot view the profile. Okay. So I'm going to kill the server, clear the console, and run it again. Let's go to our postman here. Get request, profile, there's a token 1, 2, 3, 4. Hit send. You can view the profile. Awesome. If I put a 5, hit send, you cannot view the profile. Interesting. Now there's a way for us to have code for authentication that is not inside of the action handler, because that code could be reused multiple times. So we can even go a step further and do something like this. Const authentication handler is equal to, you pass in the request, the response, and the next object in here. Okay? And basically, we're going to copy all of this, copy that, paste it in here. Okay, remember, when you use the use, that's at a global level. Okay? So what do we mean by it's a global level? What do we mean by that? Okay. What we mean is that this action handler, which is just home, also has access to is authenticated. Should you be authenticated to go see the home website? You know, like if you didn't authenticate to go to facebook.com, you can't see the home page because you're not authenticated. But then how do you authenticate if you can't go to the home page? That seems kind of stupid, right? It's like, you know, what is it? What's the saying? The horse before the carriage? Or the carriage before the horse? It's a carriage before the horse, I believe. Anyways, doesn't matter. But the metaphor probably doesn't make sense. I butchered it. I don't know. Basically, actually, I don't even know what a good metaphor for that is. Basically, you can't even knock on the door, right? To check to see, hey, who's home? You can't even check the door, right? You're getting shot by the security guard, right? That doesn't help, right? So carriage before the horse. Yes. Well, because the horse needs to go before the carriage because the horse pulls the carriage. But if you put the carriage in front of the horse, well, then how the heck is the horse supposed to pull the carriage? That's kind of the idea there. So it's possible, right, that you only want to have the authentication happen on certain routes that require it. So here is the home page, right? So if somebody's just trying to look at the home page of the website, you should be allowed to see that. Here's the home page. You should be allowed to see it. Okay, you should be allowed to. Should be no reason why you need to authenticate just to see the home website. Okay. Okay. However, because I use this middleware globally like this, whether you're looking at just the home page that doesn't require authentication, the logic for authentication is happening. And I can prove this to you because I can say console.log attempting to authenticate the request. Okay, kill the server, run it again. Try to go home. Attempting to authenticate the request. Why? Because the middleware is at a global level. So whether you're hitting a route that probably doesn't need authentication, because the middleware is global, it's going to happen whether you want it or not. So that's bad, right? So you shouldn't just blindly add middleware globally. So then your question should then be, well, then how do I solve this? If you need special things to happen on certain routes, but it's possible that this stuff that you want to happen, this logic, could happen to other routes as well, right? So you don't want to have the same code copied and pasted on a bunch of different routes. You can create middleware. For example, authentication is a great example of middleware, right? This is your authentication handler. Okay. So if I don't want to do it globally, how do I solve this problem, right? Because action handler, this part right here, this home request doesn't need authentication. You don't need that. But for profile, you do. So how do we do it now? Well, you can add middleware like this. There's the authentication handler right there. Boom. Boom. Put it right there and right there. Right before our request, we feed it through the action handler. So here we go. So this authentication handler is now going to get called with a request and response object before our actual action handler itself. So now if we save this, kill that, run this, pay attention to this left side. So here I'm going to run a GET request on 3000, hit send. It doesn't authenticate anymore. But now when I try and do /profile, hit send, you can't, did I log it? Oh, I didn't log, dang it, console.log, attempting to authenticate. Okay, kill that, clear it, run it again. All right, let's do this, let's do the demo again. So here I'm at home, going to the home page. It doesn't say attempting to authenticate on the left side, so that logic is not running. And it says, yeah, here's the home page. Cool, everything went well. But then I do a /profile. Let's say this route here requires authentication, and I go like this, I hit send. It says attempting to authenticate, and then over here it says you cannot view the profile because the authentication failed, right? You didn't give the proper, in this case, we need to have a query parameter called token that has to be 1234. Now, obviously you shouldn't have code like this, right? You should check if the token exists inside of a database. The database call could be slow, right? It could take some time, which is why you don't want to do this unnecessarily. You only want to do it when you actually need to do it, right? Don't authenticate unless you actually have to authenticate, right? That's valuable resources that you're wasting. It's wasted resources. If you do that on just authentication on a global scale on the entire application, when there are routes that don't need authentication, you're costing the company money. It's expensive to run cloud services, especially once you have, millions and millions, if not billions of users, like Facebook, for example. Can you imagine if Facebook was doing a database call even on links that did not require authentication? Like, that's wasted money, right? It's a waste. Plus, when you're doing those that authentication, when you go to the database to read, those queries go into a queue, right? They're batched, but you still have to wait your turn. So now the amount of requests that we can serve at any given time starts to go down. So people are going to start waiting and waiting longer, right? So the response times on the website is going to go down because you're doing unnecessary things. You see what I mean? So you want to make sure that certain code that's probably going to happen on different routes, you make sure that you're only doing it on those routes and you're not blindly just doing it at a global level, or else you're going to be wasting resources. Sure, the first example worked, but when we tried to do home, it was authenticating when we just want to go, we just want to see the home profile. No authentication is required there. But we want to see somebody's, like, let's say I want to see my own profile, for example, or whatever. Just imagine the demo, the scenario here. Then we do need to authenticate. Then we actually do need to authenticate. So here we can continue authenticating by passing in the token of equals 1234. Now we can hit send. And it says attempting to authenticate. And it says you can view the profile because the token 1234 is valid. Right? I hard-coded it here. But again, you can imagine that in this scenario, you would actually be looking it up in a database. You don't hard-code it. You would look it up in a database. Okay. Is this making sense? Do you guys have any questions? So nobody has any questions? No? Okay. So I'm going to kill the server. And so one thing you might have noticed, which probably could be annoying, is I'm constantly having to kill the server and then start the server up again. Right? That's kind of annoying. Every time I make a small change, I have to kill the server and then bring the server up again. So that's kind of like whatever. So one package that I'm going to use is something called nodemon. So I'm going to introduce you to a new package here. So I'm going to say npm i-d for dev dependency. It's called nodemon. It stands for node monitor. Okay. What this package is going to do is that it's going to watch your files, and anytime there's a change to your file, it's going to automatically update. It's going to rerun everything. So if I install that, so npm i-d nodemon, capital D. Oh, what happened here? Why is it like that? Wait, did I say node? Or did I do npm I? I hope I didn't do that. Should be npm i-d. Did I say node? Oh, okay. I think I said node i-d nodemon. It's supposed to be npm, node package manager. Okay, whatever. Okay, I don't know. All right, cool. So now, all we need to do is to run nodemon, to run one of our files using nodemon to watch the file. All you have to do is say npm nodemon, and then the file, so server.js. Oh wait, that's nodemon and then server.js. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so I forget what's the exact, because I don't install these things globally because I'm actually kind of afraid. So we'll do it here. So in your package.json, there should be a section called scripts. We're going to delete this test thing. We can delete that. Add a start. And then here, we're going to type in nodemon. And then say server.js. Let's say we're going to run server.js for now. So now, when I say npm start, you're going to see nodemon running right here. So there we go. We have nodemon running. So you can see our server's up and running. Cool. So if I make a slight change, like I add a space and I then save, like you see it says restarting due to changes, starting node server.js again. See that? It's restarting. So I don't have to kill it and start it up again, because that's kind of annoying. That's pretty cool, right? Okay. So nodemon is pretty cool for that. You can start and restart. Yeah, it's a big time saver. Yeah. So, you're welcome. Okay. So, what about errors? Right? Like if I say /users in this example, hit send, I keep getting this error here, right? This default error. So how can we handle errors? How can we handle errors? Okay. So what's way we can handle an error? So Alex is asking, wait, what did you change in this? Yeah, sure. So in the package.json where it says scripts, we just say start. On the start, we add a field here, start. So I properly remember this is a JavaScript object, right? This is an object here. The key is start, colon, and then the key is going to be a string, and it's going to be you're going to have the command node mon, and then whatever file you want. The other option, if you don't want to do this, you can just say node mon, like that. You can just say node mon, and it's going to run this file by default. So if I do this, okay, if I kill this and run this, npm start, by default, it's going to run app.js. If you just say node mon in here. So if you don't specify a file, it's just going to run whatever you specify in main. So if I change this to, let's say, server.js, okay, so I have to, when you change the package.json, you have to restart your server. Okay, cool. So now it's saying node server.js because I changed it up here. So anytime you ever change or modify the package.json, like you added a new package, you have to kill the server and run it again. So that's the only time you have to do it. So remember, it's just this part right here. Did you get that working, Alex? Let me know if it's working for you. Did you get it working, Alex? It just looks different. So it should look like this. If you want, paste it into the chat, and I'll take a look at it. So go ahead and just copy paste whatever you have in package.json. Make sure you're not looking at package-lock. Don't look at this one. This one is like this. Don't look at the one that has a lock. Look at the one that just says package.json. Yes, go ahead and copy and paste your package.json into the chat or into Discord, and then I'll take a look at it. So just do that right now. Okay. Right. So the problem you have here is that you have test here. You need to change this to start. So change this to start and you're golden. So just change this to start and you're gold. And then where it says main, this main part, this is the entry point to your application. That's why it's called main. Kind of like public static void main in Java or main in C and C++, that function. That's basically what this is. This is a starting point. So if you change this file from app.js to some other file, then when you run npm start, you got to change this test to start. Then it's going to run this file. So then it's going to run it as nodemon, but it's going to run this file by default. Does that make sense? So just make sure you understand that part. You should be good to go. Notice here on scripts, I have it as start, not test. So you got to change yours from test to start. And then, make sure that main is pointing to the file that you want to be your entry point. Good to go? You have to change main. I'm only changing it because I made a different file, so we can talk about middleware. You can change it from app.js to server if you create the same file like I did, server.js. Whatever file you're using right now, put that in there. So right now I'm using server.js, so I'm just pointing it to that right now. Just make sure it points to whatever file that you're currently working with, and that should be it. Okay, cool. And if you do change your package.json, you have to kill the server here manually. If you already have nodemon running, you have to kill it and then run it again because package.json has changed. So package.json has changed, you got to kill it, even if you're using nodemon. You got to kill it, start it up again. All right. So let's talk about error handling. Okay, so let's talk about error handling. So how do we handle, these, possible errors that we're going to have, in our our Express application? How do we handle these errors? Alex said still didn't do anything. So let me modify the package.json that you sent me. JSON. All right. So in Discord, I modified it. I just changed this part. You see here you have test. I changed it to start. So you just copy this and paste it. You should be fine. All right. So for errors, with here, if we had say /users and we hit send, right? We get this super basic error handler right here, right? So how can we fix this? How can we fix this? How can we handle the errors ourselves, right? So that way Express doesn't give us that, default error. Well, we're back to middleware, right? Gotta go back to middleware. So the way middleware works in this case, okay, is that the order matters for middleware. For example, let's do this example here. So if I say app.use, and now we know how to create middleware. You have a request, you have a response, and you have the next object. Okay. I'm gonna call it console.log hello. Then I'm gonna call next. Then I'm gonna create another middleware, app.use. And again, the middleware, you can have as many as you want. Okay? Don't go crazy, but yeah, you can have as many as you want. Console.log world. I can spell world. There we go. Then I'm gonna hit next. Okay, so I have two middlewares. I built two middlewares. One's gonna say hello, the other one's gonna say world. Okay, cool. So let's see that. So now if I just run, so let's say /users, it says hello and it says world. Beautiful. Look at that. It says hello world. Okay, cool. So what happens if I flip this around? Right? See? This comes before this one. Does it matter? Well, hit save. Let's see what happens. Oh, now it says hello world. What? Did I not pick it up? Let's run this again. Hit send. Now we get world hello. We get world hello. It's backwards now. So instead of saying hello world, now we get world hello. That's a problem, right? So the order actually matters here. The order matters. So you can't just put your middleware and then expect it to just, work. The order in which you subscribe your middleware is going to be in the order in which they get executed. Okay. So what does this have to do with error handlers? Well, if you have an error handler, if you want to build an error handler to handle basically your errors, then it should be the very last thing here. So after you have all your action handlers, remember, these two, these are action handlers. Action handler. Here's another action handler. Okay. And we don't have any middleware, global middleware, so we have no global middlewares. And now we're going to add an error handler. So how do we do that? Well, we say app.use. But now, instead of just having three, request, response, next, we're now going to have four. We're going to have error, request, response, and next. Now we have four. Interesting. So we're going to just do a quick log here, saying console.log middleware error handler. Okay, there we go. That's it. This adds a error handler for our entire application. So now if I run this, okay, okay, so we need to do one more thing. So is this thing, I feel like my NodeMon has been giving me problems. Okay, no, it's not working. Okay. Okay. So let's do this real quick. So in the action handler here, in this one, this get request, let's just do a throw real quick. Let's throw something. Say throw new error. I'm going to say some error like that. Okay. So hopefully this runs correctly. So if we get, and we're going to go home, and now we're going to get, I can hit send here. There we go. So here we have this middleware error handler has been called because we threw an error. So here we threw an error. Now, you're going to notice here so here you're going to notice that it's hung again, right? It's hung, right? That's because, as Jim had said before, we didn't end the response, right? We didn't send anything to the response because we threw an error here, and we have our error handler over here, but it didn't do anything to the response. Okay. But we have this new error object that we can talk about. So let's log that to the console. So console.log error. So let's log this error. Okay. Run this again. Hit send. Okay, cool. So here it just says the error is some error. There you go. So it's logging it. So we hit error dot. We're gonna have there should be a type on this. We can say error dot type. We can kill this. Oh, hit send. We have it undefined. So what? Why isn't this? This should have been an error here. So is it error dot? Is it name? I'm trying to remember what it's called here. Okay, there we go. So there's the error, and then we have error message. So we have these two things. There you go. Okay. So we have error dot name, which is going to give you the error name type. In this case, it's just going to say error. And then we have the message. Okay. So we have those two things that we can, kind of like work with. So when we try to do here on home, we're throwing this error. It says some error. We can see we're logging the message there. Okay, so we have the message here. We're just logging the message here. So you can log this message to some file. You can keep track of like, hey, some error happened when they tried to go home for whatever reason. But now, how do you kill the response? How do you kill the response? Well, you should probably respond with something, right? So if you're at this stage, if you're at some error here, then we need to do something, right? So we got to say something like, status code. This is going to be a, let's say a 500, which is internal server error. Then we're going to hit send, and error has occurred. Save. Then let's go over here to our postman. And then again, when we hit home, it's going to throw an error. Is it status code or response dot status? My bad, not status code, status. So now when we do this, we're going to get an error has occurred. And notice that we're getting a 500 internal server error. So something died, basically. That's basically what's happening. So something has died, and we're throwing this error. Okay. Okay. So this is how we can handle some errors. Now, this is just for in the case that we're going to like throw something. We're going to have to come back to this error handling when we get to databases, basically on Monday. So actually, there's some things I have to talk about. Let's see. Oh, so that's not going to be next week. It's going to be the following week. Okay. Okay. I think we should be fine then. Okay. So just to do a quick recap of what we've done today. So today we spoke about action handlers. So I kind of talked a little bit, more about what these are. So these are our action handlers. We talked about global middleware. So app.use has a request, a response, and a next object. This is some global middleware, right? Cool. And then you say next to go to the next thing. And remember, at this stage, you can modify the request and the response object if you want, right? Totally up to you. You can modify the request and response object. So you can add some headers if you wanted to, whatever. So one very popular middleware to use with Express is something called CORS, Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. That's something we're going to have to enable when we do our social media app, because our backend URL does not support being called from not the same domain. So you'll see what I mean later on. So that's a very popular middleware to use because basically what it's doing is just setting the response headers. Okay, there's something called a pre-flight that the browser is going to do to see if it's allowed to try to execute that URL called cores. So in this case, called pre-flight. But to make sure that those cross-origin headers are set. So we can use middleware to actually do that with for Express. And we'll go over that sometime next week. But yeah, so here's an example of global middleware. The other thing we need to talk, we went over is when you create some middleware, the order matters. This middleware will be called after the previous one. And we're going to call next. So effectively, this next is going to mean who's next in line, right? What's the next middleware that's next in line? So here, this is the first middleware. When it calls next, it's going to go to the next one. And when this one calls next, if there's no more middlewares, it's going to go to the action handlers, which they themselves are technically middleware. Okay? Now, it's going to go to the action handler that's specific to it based off the request URL. So if it's going to / like that, it's going to go to home. In this case, in our code, it's just going to throw an error. If you go to /profile, it's going to pass the request and response object to this middleware, which is going to, so we can also add middleware to our action handlers directly like this. So this is one example. So instead of doing a global middleware like this, we can add middleware to specific routes. So this is a middleware example, is an example of middleware that's at the route level. And then here's our action handler, right? So we're going to allow the authenticator to go through before this gets processed. And for example, if you're not authenticated, technically we shouldn't go to next, right? We should actually throw an error. If we throw the error, we should catch it over here, okay? But we'll probably have to save that for Monday. We're gonna do that on Monday because we're kind of out of time. So that's why I wanted to go over real quick what we did today. And then the last thing we touched on, which was kind of fast, is how to do error handling. So the error handling is just middleware, but it has four objects now. It has the error object, it has a request, a response, and a next. You're probably not going to use the next. You're just going to use these first three. Okay. So here we can get to the response. We can change the status code to a 500. Let's say, in this case, let's say it was a 500. So internal server error for this example. And then we're just going to send an error has occurred. And then in Postman, or the client, you'll see it like this, right? The status code turned to a 500, internal server error. And then we get the message here, an error has occurred. So we're going to use this heavily next week when we start using, we're gonna start next week with MySQL. If you guys haven't used MySQL before, we're going to do some MySQL, just a little bit, because we're also going to be using MongoDB. Does anybody have already experience with MySQL, like SQL stuff? Did you guys already? Some of you guys already take databases at Sec State, or no? You guys are just doing. Or you guys haven't done that? Can anybody tell me? I think it's 134. So you took 134 already, then I'm not going to skip MySQL. I still want to go over MySQL to show you how you can work with it with Node. But if not, we'll just go straight into MongoDB on Monday. We'll do some MongoDB. Okay. So on Monday, we'll start off with MongoDB. That's kind of, so Jim took already 134, okay. So I kind of want to still show you MySQL just because you know, even during interviews, you know, like I was asked SQL stuff. Like it's people still use it, man. Like it's not going anywhere. MongoDB is hot. You know, it's hot to trot or whatever. It's a good technology. You know, it's like the new trendy thing. But trying to get into 174 fall. Don't have my hopes. Oh man, yeah, that sucks. I remember wanting to trying to get into classes and shit. Thank God that's over. Don't want to go through that again. All right. So I think what we'll do is on Monday we're going to go over MySQL because I want to go over more error handlers. With MySQL, I want to show you how to do that. So on Monday we're going to go over MySQL and we're going to do more error handlers and more middleware. Because I want to show you examples of authenticating using a database. The database here in this case is not going to matter. Right? It's not going to matter if we use MySQL or if we use MongoDB. Okay. But if you guys already know MySQL, then I want to show you the MySQL before I show you MongoDB. That way you kind of get a refresher of the classes that you've already taken. And then when we start talking more about MongoDB, that's completely new. Okay? Okay, cool. So I'm going to kill this and we will reconvene on Monday. And on Monday, we'll be, you know, touching on MariaDB. And so before I let you go, remember that you need to have XAMPP installed. You need to have XAMPP installed. The reason why we need XAMPP installed, this control panel, is because we need to be able to start up MySQL. So I hit start. Okay. You then just say, hey, Windows Defender, yes, allow this. Let it run. Cool. Now we have our MySQL running on 3306. Okay. So what we should do this weekend is to see if you have it ready. What do you think will? When do you think we'll get started on the Twitter clone? I want to say, like in the next 2 weeks, we should be able to do it. Because okay, so the way this bootcamp has been set up is that I wanted to dedicate like a week or so to like every single bit of stuff that we're going to use in order to build our Twitter clone. Okay. Then we're basically going to build Twitter in like a few weeks. And we're going to use everything that I've gone over and stuff that I didn't talk about then. We're going to do it while we're building the application because sometimes it's better to learn while you're actually building something. And so the Twitter clone will probably come. We could probably start talking about it next week and start building it. If any of you guys are like designers or like you want to get into design and want to design something, if you guys have something like that you have in mind, like a design for it, feel free to share that with me and we can like refine that. I'm going to use Figma to build a design. I'll see what I can come up with. So if anybody wants to help with that, that'd be great. If not, it's going to look trashy because I'm terrible at design. I'm terrible at starting a design. I feel like I'm pretty good at looking at design, knowing what doesn't work. So at Jim's request, I'm sure Jim's eager and he's been, he's been here all the time and like watching all these videos and hearing me rant. Yeah, you know what? We'll start the Twitter clone next week alongside the database stuff. So we'll be working on it side by side. That means, okay, just think about this. I want you guys to think about this. Let's see, what's today's date? Today is July 16th. Okay. So this bootcamp, I want it to run until school starts. So I think university starts August 23rd, I believe. August 23rd. Anybody want to correct me? August 23rd. Something like that. So we're going to build Twitter. Not the entire thing, but we're going to build some pretty cool shit. In fact, I'm even going to show you how to do messaging and videoing because that's something that I've actually learned recently. And I want to show you guys how to build your own Twitter with like FaceTime. That's going to be pretty sick. That'll definitely get you a job. Yeah. if you can demo it to them using something called Webrtc and sockets. So I'll show you how to do that in our little Twitter clone. So we'll definitely be doing something like that. There's value in starting trashy clone and building up. Yeah. So again, we can't call it Twitter. So if somebody wants to come up with a funny name like bitter or mitter, where you send people mitts instead or something, I don't know. Somebody come up with a funny name, and we're going to do that. Yes, WebRTC. So for those of you guys that don't know what WebRTC is, WebRTC stands for Web Real-Time Communication. So it's something it's a technology that I recently learned, and let me tell you, I spent lots of sleepless nights learning that stuff. So I can show you. It's something I'm actually really good at right now. There's a lot of there's a lot of limitations with it, but anyways, we'll be doing some advanced stuff that I wasn't thinking about doing that I'm going to do. So it should be funny. The jitter, yeah, we can do jitter. I don't know. Bubble me. Bubble me. Send me a bubble. The bubble's like the message. The bubble. I don't know. We'll figure something out. But yeah. Yeah. Screw it. You know what? Let's start the Twitter clone next week. The database stuff we'll learn as we go. So I'm actually kind of hyped for it too. I hope. Here's the thing. Because we kind of started off with like 60 people, kind of on average, and they kind of dropped off down to like 7, which is understandable. This stuff is kind of dense, and it can kind of be kind of slow, and I'm sure it's kind of boring. All your classes start on the 30th, then that just gives us extra time. Here's the other. Okay, so there's another thing we probably need to talk about. I recently got a job, and I started on August 2nd, and I don't even know what the hours are going to be like. So I will make it my damnedest to make sure that I can still do this at 6 p.m. But I don't know when it's like, is it 9 to 5? Is it, I don't know that yet. But so I start work on August 2nd. So from here till then, I think in 2 weeks I'm moving. I got relocated, so that's going to be an interesting thing. So there might be a day where I might not be able to make it. But rest assured, on Monday, if any of your friends that were coming didn't want to come anymore because it was kind of boring because the topics here are kind of dense, tell them to come on Monday when we're going to start the Twitter stuff. So we're going to build our own Twitter clone. Come up with a name, jitter, bitter, bubbly, whatever. I don't care. We'll come up with a name so we don't get sued. Right? And then we'll start building it out, and it's going to be fun. Let me tell you, one of the funnest parts about building something like this is seeing it grow. Now, I want to, show you an example of some backend stuff and why it's important to have some of these fundamentals down. So, here's an example of something that I was writing earlier today. Let's see here. So here's a MariaDB service. So here's an example. So let me put this view here of why I kind of took my time with this, because here's an example of a simple query to create a user. That's quite a bit. It actually runs all the way down. So from here to here is the logic to create a user. Now, some of this is just for error handling stuff. But, it's kind of heavy. So we have to think about stuff. So that's why we haven't even touched on promises. That we need to touch promises. We need to become pros with promises. So we will be doing this soon as well. So, but yeah, some of this kind of looks kind of funky, but if you've done some SQL, this is not too bad, right? It's not too bad, some of this stuff. So I think we should be in a good spot. Again, we'll be doing this stuff, but there's a lot of patterns I need to show you that I still haven't gone over that I need to show you. So just be prepared. Like next week, it's going to be kind of hard. This is like, I don't want to show you how to build like a super easy thing. I want this to be actually kind of hard and kind of badass. That if you show it to a potential employer, be like, hey, look, this is what I built up this summer. They're gonna look at it and be like, holy shit, this is what we're actually building at here at this job too. You're hired. When I explain WebRTC to you, your mind's probably going to melt because it's actually kind of complicated, but it's kind of not, but it kind of is. So I still don't even fully understand it. So the WebRTC part is probably going to be the main thing that probably does get you a job because that's kind of new. And just to throw an example out there, Zoom uses WebRTC, Discord uses WebRTC, Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, they use WebRTC. So they use the technology, but their WebRTC tech stack is actually like heavy custom, but the basic fundamental ideas is actually still there. So if I teach you WebRTC properly, you could probably apply to any of these jobs and say that you understand WebRTC. You could probably get the job at Zoom, Discord, the Google Hangouts team, maybe. If you can pass their stupid assessment tests. Yeah, you could get in because that's actually pretty new. It's basically VoIP, but we'll talk more about it next week. Doesn't matter. We'll talk more about it. So yeah, the app that we're going to build next week is actually going to be, well, throughout up to the 30th, right? When before gym starts school. Pretty advanced. So for the next month, we're going to start focusing on the social media application because I know a lot of you guys are probably eager to start that. Is it standard way of implementing for video chat today? It's because VoIP, a lot of VoIP technologies is actually proprietary. So Skype stuff was actually proprietary until Microsoft bought Skype and then open sourced it. So a lot of the ways that you do voice over IP is proprietary. WebRTC is a technology that basically enables VoIP in the browser. And it's not proprietary, it's open source. So you can thank Google for that and the Chromium team. So yeah, it's like I said, it's very complicated, but it's also not, but it kind of is. Like we're not building WebRTC. We're just going to utilize the technology that's already in place, and it's pretty sick. Not gonna lie. And as a bonus, the WebRTC stuff is not limited to browser. Remember, this is just a specification. It's just a protocol, just like HTTP and whatnot. It's just a protocol. So when we do WebRTC in the browser, that same logic you can use for Android devices. So you can have two Android devices communicate. Okay, but again, we're going over. We'll do that stuff. But just if you guys want to Google on your own time WebRTC and just see what we're going to learn, you're going to be pretty excited. So we're going to do a basic Twitter app where like you can send messages, have people follow you, make a post, like it, comment it. We'll do all that bullshit. But the cool thing is we want to have, oh, I want to call my friend. You tap on your friend, you start calling them, and then they answer, and then you guys can talk to each other over voice or over video, or both, right? Well, how do you talk over video? You can see them through video and you can hear them through audio. So we're going to do that. That's pretty advanced. Okay, that's pretty advanced. So we'll do that. Okay, but anyways, I'm over time. I'll talk to you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, ask on the Discord. All right. So, all right. Bye, everyone.